average high school student worries about a lot of things. AP testing, college applications, working out the nearest hiding spot in a chem lab. SAT scores, what I would say to my parents in a tear-stained text behind a barricaded door. What did I do with my math textbook? And how can I protect myself against the ever-present threat of violence in my school? I was born 3 years after Columbine. I have never known a world in which school is a safe place. You all know the names: Sandy Hook, Columbine, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Virginia Tech. But what you might not know is that last month, a 14-year-old shot up his high school in Richmond, Indiana. The month before that, a 16-year-old killed a sophomore in his hometown in North Carolina. News that would have been, at any other time, a nationwide headline. We've grown numb to this issue as it courses through the veins of this country like a poison. The Center for Globalization on Research Control says that killing takes place at an average of 87 times per day in this country. Going to war in Afghanistan is less dangerous than going to school in Chicago. I could stand here and pretend that the solution is simple, because to some degree, I suppose, it is. 18th century laws are insufficient to handle the threat of 21st century weapons. But can all of these problems really be solved from the Senate floor? Of course not. Even if we implement a nationwide permit-to-purchase policy, which would prevent an 11-year-old and a convicted domestic abuser from walking into a Walmart and purchasing the same weapons that the United States military uses in active combat, we'd still be left with the wreckage of a grieving nation following a storm of death and destruction at the hands of gun violence. I'm sorry. This country, we have a culture of violence here. Movies like John Wick, Kill Bill, Pulp Fiction, they're rites of passage for young boys and girls. The sadistic high is a drug to be chased by American youth. We cannot outgrow it. So, where do we go from here? Of course, we have to realize that as a country, we are incapable of solving all of these issues on a city council or with metal detectors placed at the front of every school. Even if we implement things like this, we'll still be left with a culture that's obsessed with violence, and we need to look no further than the football field. What other nation begins their biggest sporting event of the year with a flyover by the Air Force? What other nation begins every game with the flag presented by the US military? This grotesque worship of the military simply adds to the almost pornographic obsession with violence, with death, with guns. This normalization of violence has a distinctly masculine undercurrent. After all, isn't that a quintessential part of what it means to be a man? To be stoic and feared. To approach life with force, with strength, with power, and your almost Machiavellian tool belt. We enforce the cyclical process in the way we raise our boys, because to be soft is to be weak, and the process by which this is stamped out is brutal and bloody. Real men don't cry, real men don't wear pink, real men play football, real men don't take no for an answer. Real men have guns and aren't afraid to use them to protect what's rightfully theirs. We aim to simplify this issue because we don't want to admit that it stems from our larger culture. We march to the steps of Washington and ask that those men so high up in their tower solve the problems for the people here below. It's not that simple. Yes, there are steps that lawmakers can, should, must take in order to limit access to guns. But we have to take this issue to the end of the line because at the end of the day, we invited it here. Every time an 11-year-old drools over the gun rack of a Walmart, we invited it here. Every time a child improperly handles a weapon because her father doesn't carry it with the weight it's owed, we invited it here. And every time a teenager takes the skills he honed from a first-person shooter video game onto the streets, we invited it here. We held open the door and watched while this issue walked through and made itself at home among us. We cannot pretend that this is a law, that this is an issue that can be solved by laws and regulations. And every time students are killed in the place that is intended to be the safest for them, we invited it here. Violence is not something to be taken lightly. It is an issue that runs deeply in our culture, and it demands to be seen eventually. And if we ignore it when our children spend their days playing violent video games, watching violent movies, or playing war on the school playground, it will surface. We just have to wonder when. We are what we create, just as we are what we consume. And we just have to wonder, can we live with that? Thank you.